Section 1 and 2 of Lecture on Artificial Flight. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Carrie Gorman. Lecture on Artificial Flight by William G. Krueger. Sailing in the Air. Section 1. Introduction. Gentlemen of the Academy, the problem of artificial flight is of such great importance to civilization, so interesting and fascinating, not only to the student, but to everyone, and it allows us to indulge in such a wide field for speculation as to the great changes which will be wrought by the practical solution of it in the social, political, and commercial world, that I must beg of you to consider only my good intentions in appearing before you, and pardon my shortcomings as a lecturer. It is my first attempt, and is simply undertaken to bring the subject more understandingly before the public, that they may insist, morally and pecuniarily, the several investors who are wrestling with it more or less successfully, some rather less. If only one inventor in 100 should meet with flattering results, the attention bestowed upon all will be repaid 1,000-fold by that one success. The idea of sailing through the air in a flying machine is not new, nor such an absurd one as is generally supposed, and it is indeed important to investigate and lay it before the public more directly than has been done heretofore through the medium of great, musty, and long-winded volumes. If found to seem practicable and feasible, it is for you, gentlemen, to see that the future great state of California shall also be ahead in this, one of the greatest and most important inventions of the age, as she is and has been in many other things before. The subject has really been taken hold of in a thorough and scientific manner only the last few years, but with such earnestness and scientific knowledge and intelligence, not only by the foremost and principal society for the advancement of the art, the Aeronautic Society of Great Britain, to whom really the most credit must fall, but in every civilized country, and so much has been done already to prove not only the possibility but the absolute certainty of an early practical solution of the problem, that soon we will see the air traversed in all directions by aspiring man. Many seeming impossibilities of the present need only time and effort to become realities in the near future. End of Section 1. Section 2, History and Fable. In turning our thoughts to history, reaching back even into the mazy and wonderful ages of fable, we find that from time immemorial the great science of aerostation has occupied the minds of philosophers and inventors. There can be little doubt that it was known and made use of in olden times in isolated cases, but was again lost, like many other important inventions. We are furnished with many interesting proofs of this. Old Chinese, Arabian, and Hindu fables give some beautiful descriptions of aerial chariots, in which wizards, princes, and fairies sped over the fertile and populous plains of their native country, dispersing good or evil, according to their disposition, to the poor devils crawling in the dust beneath them. The Jews had their cherubim, the Assyrians had left us their winged bulls, the Greeks their sphinxes, while the Roman writers describe how that mythical personage, Daedalus, a famous Athenian artificer and builder of the Cretan labyrinth, constructed wings with which he flew across the Aegean Sea to escape the resentment of Minos. But his son Icarus, undoubtedly of his strength giving out, fell into the water and was drowned. Their nation has bequeathed to us various bas-reliefs illustrative of what appears well-proportioned wings. Archytas, the great geometrician, made a wooden dove that flew like a natural one, and the famous German astronomer, John Mueller, who died suddenly in Rome at the age of 40 in 1476, and whose memory was celebrated last month in Germany, constructed an artificial eagle which flew out to greet the Emperor, Charles V, when he visited Nuremberg. This Mueller was more widely known by the assumed name of Regiomontanus, the Kingschiller, that is, one from Königsberg, a small village in the heart of Germany, the custom of the times being for learned men to adopt the Latin name of their birthplace. He invented the almanac and prepared the first astronomical tables, by the aid of which mariners who, up to that late day, could only make coasting voyages, were enabled to thrust themselves to the open sea with some degree of assurance, and Columbus was among the earliest to use these tables, 20 years afterwards, on his first discovery voyage to America. Another German, a young watchmaker's apprentice, constructed a flying machine, with which he, when showing the same to his ignorant townspeople, flew away to escape mobbing. His bones and pieces of the machine were found some years afterwards in a wild and isolated part of the Black Forest. Towards the end of the 15th century, Giovanni Battista Dantes, of Perugia, flew several times over the Thrasymenian Sea. He certainly must have been at a considerable elevation, for he fell on a church steeple and broke a leg. Another account, particularly noticed in history, is that of a man who flew high in the air in the city of Rome under the reign of Nero, but lost his life in the descent. In Astra Castra, we read that soon after Bacon's time, projects were instituted to train up children in the exercise of flying with artificial wings, and considerable progress was made. By the combined effort of running and flying, they were enabled to skim over the surface, as it were, with incredible speed. This same Roger Bacon, an eminent philosopher of the 13th century, and possessed of the very highest genius and ability, whose ideas and knowledge, like Franklin's, were many hundred years ahead of his age, descants in his work, in glowing language, of the practicability of constructing engines that could navigate the air. He accomplished wonderful things in his day, and was accused of holding communion with the devil, who was quite an important personage in those times. His writings were interdicted, and himself locked up to prevent closer acquaintanceship of his readers with the aforesaid friend. About the confessor's time, a monk, Elmirus, in Spain, flew often, by means of a pair of wings, many miles for high elevations. Cuperus, in his treatise on the excellency of man, contends that it is practicable for human beings to attain the faculty of flying. He asserts that Leonardo da Vinci, the great painter of the Lord's Supper and other highly prized works of art, practiced it successfully. The reasoning of the great John Wilkins, Lord Bishop of Chester, who died in 1672, embodies the sentiments and principles of all these on the subject even stronger. In his work on mechanical motion, he treats expressly on artificial flight, and conceives, in the 6th chapter, the framing of such, quote, volatant automata, unquote, very easy, and says that the time will come when men will call for their wings when about to make a journey, as they do now for their boots and spurs. Lastly, in the Journal des Savants, on the 12th of September, 1678, an account is given of one Besnier, a locksmith of Sable, France, who succeeded in flying. But as his machine was extremely primitive, the wings consisting only of 4 rectangular surfaces, one at the end of each of 2 poles, which passed over the shoulder of the operator and were worked alternately up and down, the inventor could only avail himself of their aid in progressively rising himself from one height to another, until an elevated position was reached, when he could glide through the air a long distance. Many more cases could be cited. Some ended disastrously, others, because of apathy, distrust, ignorance, and superstition of the people, were lost sight of again, while some, perhaps the most practical ones, and of which we find many indications in old writings, were never made known for selfish reasons. Such has been the fate of this, one of the most interesting problems, almost up to the present time. We were, perhaps, not prepared sufficiently to receive the great boon. We had to have the printing press, steam, and electricity first, before we could attempt this next great step toward a higher civilization. End of section 2. Sections 3, 4, and 5 of Lecture on Artificial Flight. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Carrie Gorman. Lecture on Artificial Flight by William G. Krueger. Section 3, Discovery of the Balloon. Although it is well understood now by most scientific men that the principles upon which ballooning rests will scarcely form any part in the solution of the problem of aerial navigation, yet, when in 1782 the brothers Montgolfier, in France, made the first successful experiments with small paper balloons filled with heated air, it was thought that the key to that wonderful art had been found. Many applied themselves to its improvement, and the next year already saw gas balloons on a much larger scale. The first passengers, who had the honor of being sent up into the realms of space, were a sheep, a cock, and a duck, and as their safe descent proved highly satisfactory, the well-known French savant, Pilatre de Rosier, tried the same experiment shortly afterwards with great success, reaching a height of nearly 2 miles. The glowing descriptions of his experience raised the excitement of all classes to fever heat. Numerous day and night ascensions were made by diplomats, distinguished naturalists, professors of note, scientific women, and gymnastic aspirants, and their journeys soon became more daring and extended to wider fields. End of Section 3. Section 4. Noted Air Voyages. Blanchard, the supposed inventor of the parachute, with the American Dr. Jeffries, were the first to cross the Channel from England to France. M. Charles, the inventor of the gas balloon, and one of the earliest and most enthusiastic advocates of aerostation, made extensive voyages. Madame Thilby, of Lyons, was the first of her sex who trusted herself to the elastic element. Crosby, who passed over the sea from Ireland to England, came near losing his life, for the balloon, being struck with great force by an adverse current of air, and most of the gas escaping, tore over the raging waters at a fearful speed until the courageous man was rescued near the English coast by a ship happening in his way. But the view which he had enjoyed, seeing both countries at once, was sublime beyond description, and compensated him for all the danger. He had been at such a height that, although the July sun melted everything below, his ink was a lump of ice, and the quicksilver in the instruments had sunk almost out of sight. The Battle of Flores in 1794 was won by the French over the Austrians principally through the aid of balloon reconnoitering, and similar service was occasionally performed by the balloon in our own war. The favorably known Italian, Count Zambeccari, who added many improvements to this art and created great interest in the principal countries of Europe, made an ascension in 1803 with 2 friends at Bologna. The 3 alighted in the Adriatic Sea and were picked up by fishermen, while the balloon, free from weight, rose again and was carried by the wind to the Turkish fort Vihach, where the commander, believing it a present, quote, sent from heaven, unquote, had it cut up in small pieces and divided amongst his friends as amulets. But quite a, quote, reverse opinion, unquote, was generally entertained by most of the ignorant Christian country people when the huge monster happened to fall amongst them for the first time, and their comparison of it to the, quote, evil one, unquote, is excusable when we consider the peculiar smell of escaping gas after their attack upon it with pitchforks and similar agricultural implements. Among other remarkable ascensions is that of Guy Lussac, who reached the prodigious height of nearly 4.5 miles. This was exceeded, though, by another scientific aeronaut, James Glaisher, in 1862, who, with a companion, mounted the great altitude of 7 miles, over 36,000 feet. But as he was insensible for some minutes after reaching the elevation of 29,000 feet, the highest ever attained by human beings, their calculations could only be approximated. The mercury in the hygrometer, a delicate instrument for measuring the moisture in the atmosphere, had fallen below the scale while they were rising more than 1,000 feet per minute. There are instances of balloons that have shot upwards at a rate of 50 feet per second, or much over half a mile per minute. But generally, even 20 feet per second is a rare occurrence. And here might be mentioned that, since the late serious loss of several French scientists by asphyxia or cold on their unfortunate ascension, the problem of maintaining life in the highest regions of the atmosphere has been solved in France. With a certain apparatus, man could manage to live comfortably nearly 10 miles above the level of the sea, while ordinarily 2 miles is the most. As to horizontal speed, perhaps the fastest time on record was made by Garnerin and Snowdon, from London to Colchester, some 80 miles in 1 hour, or about 110 feet per second, almost swifter than an eagle flies. And another balloon went from Paris across the Alps, to the vicinity of Rome in 22 hours, making over 50 miles per hour considering its zigzag travel. The reason for such great speed is that the different air currents travel far faster in the upper regions than below, where the velocity of the wind is seldom over 20 miles per hour, and yet, were it not for the continually changing scenery, the aeronaut would imagine himself stationary. The shortest trip, perhaps, in the annals of this art, both as to height and distance, was made a few years ago by a gymnast at Woodward's Gardens, that most beautiful pleasure resort in this city. The little, disobliging monster went lazily and with great difficulty over the fence and capsized promptly on the other side, leaving the trapeze man hanging by the seat of his unmentionables on the top of it in an uncomfortable position, but no bones were broken. End of Section 4. Section 5. Absence of danger. It is erroneous to suppose that aerial voyages are fraught with even ordinary danger. On the contrary, travel by sea and land is far more so, for although thousands of ascensions have been made, but very few persons have met with accidents, in fact, a less number by far comparatively than by any other profession or mode of locomotion, and whenever such has happened, gross carelessness or ignorance was often the cause. During the late Franco-German War, over 60 balloons, many but indifferently constructed, left Paris during the siege, with some 180 persons and nearly 3 millions of letters. All reached a point of safety. Professor Wise, the most noted American aeronaut, has made during the last 40 years nearly 500 voyages, and one in particular in 1859 of nearly 1,200 miles, perhaps the longest on record, with 3 companions, from St. Louis, Missouri to New York State. This trip was made partly in the midst of a tornado, while above Lake Erie, during which time some 20 sailing craft succumbed to the effects of the storm, yet the intrepid aeronauts alighted in safety. M. Green, who was the first to use coal gas instead of pure hydrogen, and has also made hundreds of successful ascensions, was carried from London to Weilburg in the center part of Germany, about 700 miles in 8 hours, without the slightest mishap. Lastly, Arban crossed the Alps from Marseille to Turin, 400 miles, in stormy weather during the night. Mont Blanc to the left, on a level with the top of which he was, resembled an immense block of crystal, sparkling with 1,000 fires, while the moon occasionally seemed to have borrowed the light of the sun. Ends of sections 3, 4, and 5.
Sections 6 through 9 of Lecture on Artificial Flight. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Barry Eads. Lecture on Artificial Flight by William G. Krueger. Section 6. Charm of Aerial Travel. Nothing can equal the beauty of an aerial voyage, that most wonderful, easy, and luxurious mode of locomotion with its entire absence of dizziness. This sensation being lost with the separation from earth as soon as the last cord, which unites us with the world below, is cut. In rising from the ground, the feelings are absorbed in the novelty and magnificence of the spectacle presented, while the ears are saluted with the buzz of distant sound until the clouds are reached, when all is still as death. The scene is sublime. Around and beneath, the clouds roll in magnificent grandeur. They form pyramids, castles, reefs, icebergs, ships, and towers, and again dissolve into chaos. The half-obscured sun, shedding his mellow light upon the picture, gives it a rich and dazzling luster. Reverence for the work of nature, the solemn stillness, and admiration indescribable, all combined, seem to make a sound of praise. The earth, which is never lost sight of at any height except clouds interfere or night sets in, seems to be concave, like the inside of a flattish, hollow globe, instead of the outside, as would naturally be supposed. The reason for this optical delusion is that the horizon appears on a level with the aeronaut, while the distance downwards remains unaltered, making the surface below appear like a valley. The earth presents the panoramic view of an immense map, such as the enchanted Aladdin must have enjoyed. The coloring, designating the various products of the soil, is lively and exquisite. Variegated grass plats, the golden tinge of waving grain fields, the more somber foliage of the trees, the glossy surface of the water dazzling in the sunbeams, with occasional white specks for sailing craft, the innumerable villages with tastefully decorated and tinny toy-like houses, the numerous roads tortuously spreading over the surface and looking like chalk lines on a gaudy carpet, fairy-like carriages seemingly drawn by mice and guided by Lilliputian little things. Such is the beauty of this glorious earth. Yet, when mountains appear like ant-hills and Niagara a neat little cascade in a pleasure garden, instead of the raging grandeur, only a frothy bubble, man must be forcibly reminded that he is but the minutest animalcule, and not of so much importance as he presumes himself to be. No less impressive is the scene at night. The sublime exhibition in the vast solitude and darkness of night creates the most stupendous effect upon the lonely aeronaut. The earth's surface, as far as the eye can reach, absolutely teems with the scattered fires of a watchful population, and exhibits a starry spectacle below, that rivals in brilliancy the luster of the firmament above. A city looming up in the distant horizon gradually appears to blaze like a vast conflagration. On drawing near, every street is marked out by its particular line of fires. The forms and positions of the theaters, squares, and markets are indicated by the presence of larger and more irregular accumulations of light, and the faint murmurs of a busy population still actively engaged in the pursuits of pleasure or the avocation of gain, all together combined form a picture which, for beauty and effect, cannot be conceived. Again, higher up, or when clouds intervene, the sky, at all times darker when viewed from an elevation, seems almost black with the intensity of night, while by contrast the stars, redoubled in their luster, shine like sparks of the whitest silver, scattered upon the jetty dome around. Nothing can exceed this density of night. Not a single object of terrestrial nature can anywhere be distinguished, and an unfathomable abyss of darkness visible encompasses one on every side. It seems like cleaving the way through an interminable mass of black marble, and a light lowered from these dizzying heights appears to absolutely melt its way down into the frozen bosom of the surrounding inkiness. The cold here is intense. End of section 6. Section 7. Aerial Voyages Health Promoting. But while the charm of floating in the air is so fascinating, these delightful ascensions will be even more beneficial in sanitary respects. Atmospheric pressure, exerting nearly 30,000 pounds upon a human being of full growth, has much to do with the mechanical functions of life. At a moderate elevation, 1/10 of this weight can be relieved, and at greater heights even 1/3, as balloon experiments have sufficiently proven. This pressure, then, diminishing upon the muscular system, allows it to expand. The lungs at once become more voluminous, and breathing purer air. The freedom with which all the circulating fluids of the system are allowed to act in the rare atmosphere intensely quicken the animal and mental faculties. The novelty of the voyage and the most sublime grandeur opening to the eye and mind of the invalid, all assist to promote health, impart new life, inspire ideas, and invigorate soul and body. End of section 7. Section 8. Parachutes. This simple contrivance often forms an adjunct to balloons. Its appearance is generally that of a huge family umbrella of revolutionary times. It is likewise concave underneath because such form, above all others, condenses a column of atmosphere more rapidly and retards its velocity in the descent immensely. The ribs are generally of whalebone or bamboo, covered with strong domestic muslin, and a light wicker basket is fastened some 12 feet underneath for the aeronaut, who may cut himself loose from the balloon with perfect safety at any height and descend slowly to the ground, if the parachute is strongly made and perhaps 14 feet across when open. By giving it a slight inclination, it can be made to descend, sliding like, a long distance from the vertical point, and some of the flying machines we read of have likely been only a modified form of the parachute. The nautilus on the ocean moves on the principle of it. The pollen of plants is carried from one place to another by this mode. So the flying squirrel moves in parabolic curves from tree to tree and even crosses rivers when the nut crop fails, as also the flying tree frog slants down long distances from high trees. This animal has a considerable expansion of skin, connecting the toes only, and which looks as if on its four legs were fastened those short, broad, and light snowshoes, known as web feet, used in our northern territories in winter. It is therefore called a web-foot frog, but from which must not be inferred that it is an Oregonian, for it is encountered so far only in Borneo. End of Section 8. Section 9. The Kite. Everyone is undoubtedly acquainted with the exceedingly simple mechanism, invented when boys commenced to exist, for the enjoyment of one of the most pleasant pastimes, kite flying. It is indulged in mostly during the fall, and perhaps a trifle more so in the rural districts than in the cities because of the greater freedom of room which stubble fields and meadows allow. But attention has also been given to the employment of this kind of aerostation as a means of support and conveyance, and kites have been made as much as 30 feet high, looking more like buoyant sails than boyish playthings, and exerting an immense power of waftage. Loaded wagons have been drawn over turnpikes, persons have frequently been carried up in the air by huge kites, and in some parts of Europe experiments have been made to signal and save shipwrecked people on dangerous coasts, proving sufficiently that the kite can be made, even in its present primitive state, to be quite useful. In this connection, it may not be amiss to state that the first person known to have ascended, some 80 years ago, as the history of kite carriage informs us, was a miss, a young lady of some 126 pounds at vertipoise. She was seated in a chair underneath the gigantic structure which weighed nearly 30 pounds, had a surface of about 60 square feet, and rose most majestically to a height of 600 feet, an incontrovertible instance of the superior courage of the gentler sex over man. The kite is maintained in the air by two opposing forces: the impelling power of the wind, lifting it by striking against it at an angle, and the restraining powers of the string, motive force and gravitation combined, so that in the kite, above all, we possess in a crude form the three principles requisite for artificial flight: the plane, weight, and propelling force. By improving upon the kite, therefore, we will arrive at the practical solution of the problem of artificial flight. End of Section 9. Sections 10 through 12 of Lecture on Artificial Flight by William G. Krueger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Barry Eads. Section 10. Balloons Impracticable. It is not creditable to the present age that the problem of aerial navigation has not been solved, but one of the causes has undoubtedly been the discovery of the balloon, which has retarded this science for nearly a century by misleading men's minds, and causing them to look for a solution of the problem by the aid of a machine lighter than air, and which has no analogue in nature. Weight is one of three essential factors in flight, for a light body cannot be propelled through a heavier one. Hence, all attempts at driving and guiding the balloons have signally failed. This arises from the vast extent of surface which it necessarily presents, rendering it a fair conquest to every breeze that blows, and because the power which animates it is a mere lifting power, which acts in a vertical line. The balloon, consequently, rises through the air in opposition to the law of gravity, by which all flying creatures are governed, very much as a dead bird falls downward in accordance with it. Having no hold upon the air, this cannot be employed as a fulcrum for regulating its movements, and hence the cardinal difficulty of ballooning as an art of locomotion and its uncertainty, because the air currents cannot be regulated. A balloon starting from San Francisco might be intended for New York, but against the desire of the passengers, alight in China or the Cannibal Islands, which would be rather disagreeable. It is simply astonishing to hear of people trying, year after year, to propel elongated or cigar shaped balloons with a car underneath and a screw propeller, of course, an experiment which was tried, unsuccessfully, 40 years ago. But this is generally the first conceived project of an aspirant for fame who commences to think on the subject, and soon fancies himself the happy possessor of the secret. Yet what a very small amount of science is necessary to show its fallacy. In fact, all kinds of propositions for the propulsion of balloons have been advanced and experimented upon, but scarcely any improvements have been made since the first 5 years after its invention, proving perhaps more conclusively than anything else that the practical propulsion of balloons is an impossibility. The most remarkable idea in this respect was undoubtedly that of Tesla. He flattered himself to be able to train geese or other birds to pull a balloon by being hitched to it, while the conductor in a car underneath was to direct their movements by the aid of a long pole. Although the training of birds is not so ridiculous as it may seem, yet he found that geese, if not too tough, answer the purpose of a good roast much better. And another genius, still more unique, long before balloons were invented, conceived the idea that air, like water, must have a defined limit, and that it was possible to sail on its surface like ships on the ocean. He did not state how to get up there, but lost no time in inducing the King of Portugal to forbid anyone, under penalty of death, to use said invention. So far, no one has come in conflict with that law. Yet, although the balloon is impracticable as a means of transportation, it should by no means be discarded, for it can be made very useful for scientific and other observations, to give pleasure to thousands of people by fanciful ascensions, and not the least to serve, as stated before, sanitary purposes when captive and well secured. But instead of lowering and elevating it continually, as is being done at present, and which occasions danger and great loss of time and money, a contrivance should be made by which persons could safely, and without interruption, be carried up and down underneath parachutes. End of Section 10. Section 11. Reasons why the problem has remained unsolved. The slow progress made and the unsatisfactory state of the question, notwithstanding the large and universal share of attention bestowed upon the subject from earliest times, must be attributed to a variety of causes, the most prominent of which are the great difficulty of the problem, the incapacity on the one hand, or theoretical tendencies on the other, of those who have devoted themselves to its elucidation, the lack of means of inventors generally, and the difficulty of obtaining the same to experiment and carry out their ideas even after the completion of their invention. Hence so many failures amongst this class, while men of genius in the literary or most other fields require but little pecuniary outlay to succeed. The stolid indifference of an unthinking community, which so often proves the death blow to the mind of the philosophical inquirer, and whose aim is condemned or pronounced as visionary, absurd, and incapable of realization, instead of receiving that support and encouragement which is so necessary to success. Flight has therefore been unusually unfortunate in its votaries. It has been cultivated on the one hand by profound thinkers, especially mathematicians, who have worked out innumerable theorems, but have never submitted them to test of experiment, and on the other by either uneducated charlatans who, despising the abstractions of science entirely, have made the most wild and ridiculous attempts at a practical solution of the problem, or inventors who, desirous of triumph over some of the acknowledged difficulties of propulsion and navigation, but for want of organization or pecuniary support, or being unacquainted with preceding failures in the same direction, or ignorant of some one condition demanded by the peculiar nature of the experiment, but which is absolutely necessary to success, have also failed, thus causing still greater doubt in the public mind, and consequently less support to inventors in the same direction afterwards. A common error prevails that models are essential to help the inventor. The province of the model is to explain the invention to others after it has been made, and not to assist the inventor. Except in very restricted limits, they have been found to be almost useless, and most of our valuable discoveries have been made and carried out without their aid. Watt's first condensing engine had a cylinder of 18 inches diameter, or about the average size now in use. It is so with agricultural and other practical inventions, and applies particularly to flying machines. Models often signally prove failures on a small scale, yet would be successful on a larger. The problem is not an unphilosophical phantom, but a mathematically demonstrated truth which needs only actual realization to revolutionize the world for the better. That the air is navigable can no longer be denied. End of section 11. Section 12. Fundamental Principles of Flight. In contemplating the boundless atmosphere, we perceive it to be tenanted by a multitude of creatures of varied form and size, who move and direct themselves with marvelous ease and skill. These beings, so different in their nature, form, and construction, from the proud eagle to the bloodthirsty mosquito, resemble one another in the possession of three important fundamental principles which constitute the power of flight. These are weight or gravity, surface or resistance of the atmosphere against it, and force or power of projection. The medium in which the phenomenon of flight is produced, the air, is an invisible, impalpable, comparatively imponderable fluid, and its density is nearly 800 times less than that of water. Hence, a movement through it can be made far more rapidly than through its sister medium. Nevertheless, if agitated, it is capable of exerting great pressure, as the tempestuous storms, overturning fences, unroofing houses, uprooting trees, and carrying even large animals into the air teach us. Hereon, then, that is, the proper manipulation principally in creating artificial currents of air, hinges the secret of flight, because this phenomenon is reproduced in a manner identical, if a surface is moved against it, as we see in the wings of flying creatures. End of section 12. Sections 13 through 15 of Lecture on Artificial Flight by William G. Krueger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Barry Eads. Section 13. Weight. Weight is absolutely indispensable in flight. It adds momentum and assists the propelling power, with greater force comparatively in heavier bodies. A wooden cannonball can fly only a fraction of the distance of an iron one, and an equal weight of musket balls, propelled by the same charge of powder, will not reach near so far as the cannonball, because of its consolidation in one body. And a feather or little toy balloon can not only not be propelled, but will actually recoil if attempted. Hence, all flying animals are many hundred times heavier than air, and the heaviest are generally the best flyers, yet require the least amount of surface and force in proportion. The sympathy existing between weight and power is very great. Weight acts in flight upon the oblique surfaces of the wings in conjunction with the power expended, and thereby husbanding the latter immensely. Thus only are the denizens of the air enabled to perform long journeys, while otherwise they could retain their position in the upper region but a very brief time, as their strength is no greater than that of other animals and would soon give out. Weight acts on flying creatures in a similar manner as we see it in the clock, where weight is the moving power, and the pendulum merely regulates its movements. Of course, the belief of many that birds have large air cells in their interior, that those cavities contain heated air, and that this heated air in some mysterious manner contributes to, if it does not actually produce, flight, falls to the ground upon the least reflection. No argument could be more fallacious. The bird is a heavy, compact, by no means bulky body, and that trifle of heated air or gas, if such were the case, but is not, which possibly might help elevation, would be but dust in the scale. A small balloon of 2 feet diameter, a larger body than any bird, can lift only about a quarter of a pound. But, besides, many admirable flyers, such as bats, have no air cells, while many animals, never intended to fly, are provided with them. It may therefore be reasonably concluded that flight is in no way connected with air cells, and the best proof that can be adduced is to be found in the fact that it can be performed to perfection in their absence. End of section 13. Section 14. Surface. The next of the 3 properties necessary for flight is the extension of the locomotive organs in winged beings, the planes. Although the wings in the different animals differ much in their form, texture, construction, number, and the matter which composes them, yet they resemble one another in the expansion and development of their surfaces, being stretched on each side of the body and playing the part of a parachute. The animal, therefore, cannot fall like a stone, in obedience to the accelerated force of gravity, but it descends with a slow velocity, constant, regular, and considerably abated. This influence, then, exercised by the flat surface on the fall of masses, is seen in a sheet of paper of the same weight as a grain of lead. It will fall much more slowly. But if we make the paper a compact ball and flatten the lead into a broad, thin sheet, the reverse result will be produced, and the paper reach the ground before the lead. Therefore, bodies in the air are light or heavy in proportion to their surfaces, and the heaviest may become light by an alteration of form. For successful flight, then, a just proportion of surface and weight is necessary, because, as stated, the air being elastic, its resistance is much more effectual with light bodies than heavy ones. And this proportion is such that the extent of surface is always in an inverse ratio to the weight of the winged animal. The principle in the fall of flat surfaces is strictly applicable to the bird. Its weight, tending downwards, and being situated below the plane of suspension, keeps it well balanced, so that it cannot fall head over heels, nor rapidly. If the wings are inclined at an angle with the horizon, the bird will not descend vertically, but glide along an inclined plane with much greater swiftness, because the vertical distance remains unaltered in the same space of time. Hence their immense horizontal velocity, without comparatively any effort. This is in obedience to 2 forces, gravity or weight and resistance of surface. End of section 14. Section 15. Power. But for actual flight a 3rd force is required, the propelling power, the necessary amount of which has greatly been overrated by many mathematicians. Borelli estimated the power of a 3-pound bird to be over 130 horses relatively, but Navier, more reasonably, calculated a force of 5 horses sufficient for the flight of a pigeon. Coulomb, again, offset this great liberality by demonstrating that the surface to support a man must be 2 miles long and 200 feet wide, with the power of a coreless engine to propel such a 50-acre ranch. Now, facts prove that man can, without danger, descend from an high elevation under a surface of much less than 15 feet diameter, and the force to lift himself, as will be shown hereafter, is also comparatively small. He can walk upstairs and likewise mount upon air, which, properly manipulated, becomes sufficiently solid. It has been demonstrated beyond a doubt that the heaviest flying animals require the smallest amount of surface and power in proportion. The surface is less because the resistance of the atmosphere is much greater toward one unbroken body than all the parts thereof if detached. Hence, a stork weighing 8 times as much as a pigeon needs only 5 square feet of surface, while the 8 pigeons, with nearly 1 square foot each, possess together over 7 square feet, and the common fly, if magnified to the size of the crane, would show a surface 60 times as large. The heaviest flyers require the least amount of power, because weight, as stated before, itself is power, which increases in a certain ratio. Hence we find the muscular force of the small beings who possess little weight to be enormous. This is particularly so with insects who are the strongest in creation. A stag beetle, of which 200 weigh only 1 pound, can lift 14 ounces. Crickets leap 80 times their own length, and the lively flea can jump through space estimated at even 200 times the length of its body, which accounts for the difficulty of catching it. If a mouse would simply reproduce the gait of a horse, its progress would be about 20 inches per minute only, and cats would soon find themselves out of employment. Nature has wisely established a compensation to make amends for the diminutiveness of organs of rapidity of movement, and has consequently furnished the animal with the necessary power to produce this rapidity. The force necessary for lifting in all winged beings is not near so great as is generally supposed. The fall of a body, continually accelerating, is 17 feet per second, and a very great force would be necessary indeed to offset this gravitation, if that second were allowed to expire without a counter movement. But when that body is provided with a parachute-like arrangement, there is no such rapid fall of 17 feet per second. And when, besides, the force is applied constantly, thereby counteracting even a fraction of the fall, the power needed to accomplish this is but a trifle. It is the principle, to use a homely phrase, that a stitch in time saves 9. What extra strength the animal possesses has to be used in pursuit or escape, from the powerful eagle to the minutest insect. They must be prepared to exert at a given moment all the strength that nature has given to them in store. Their strength is no greater than that of fishes or quadrupeds. All possess surplus power greatly above the need of their average use, and the strength exhibited therefore by flying creatures shows only that but a small portion of it used for lifting and propelling purposes. Eagles have been known to carry off small deer, lambs, hares, and even young children. Many of the fishing birds, as pelicans and herons, can likewise carry considerable loads, while the smaller birds are capable of transporting comparatively large twigs for building purposes. A swallow can traverse 1,000 miles at a single journey, and the swift, the fastest of all, is known to have made nearly 180 miles an hour. The albatross, despising compass and landmark, trusts himself boldly for weeks together to the mercy or fury of the mighty ocean, and the huge condor of the Andes, as Humboldt, Darwin, Orton, and others inform us, lifts himself to a height where no sound is heard, and from an unseen point surveys, in solitary grandeur, the wide range of plain and mountain below. He has been seen flying over the Chimborazo, and attains, on occasions, an altitude of 6 miles. End of section 15. Sections 16 and 17 of Lecture on Artificial Flight by William G. Krueger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Barry Eads. Section 16. Flying Creatures, Their Proportions, Movements. The great common characteristic of the different winged beings are the same throughout all the modifications of detail. These are, as stated, weight, extension of surface, and the mechanical application of the propelling force, so that the animal is a gliding plane, part of which is fixed and the other movable, and the whole thing being maintained in stable equilibrium by the weight of the body, placed a little below the plane of suspension. By comparing the different species, it is found, by M. DeLucy and others, that the extent of the surface is in inverse ratio to the weight, the determination of this ratio being based upon certain considerations. The proof of this is overwhelming. Supposing all flying creatures of the same weight, say 1 pound, it is found that the gnat possesses 50 square feet of surface per pound. Common fly, 22 square feet of surface per pound. Bee, 5. Beetle, 4. Sparrow, 3. Pigeon, 1 2/3. Stork, nearly 1. Vulture, 3/4. Crane, nearly 1/2. Thus we find the gnat, of which 160,000 make 1 pound, and which weighs 460 times less than the beetle, has 13 times more surface comparatively. The sparrow weighs about 10 times less than the pigeon and has twice as much surface in proportion. The Australian crane, one of the heaviest birds, it weighs over 20 pounds, or almost 3,000,000 times as much as the gnat, possesses the least surface, not quite 10 square feet, or 120 times less than that insignificant but formidable animal. Yet its flight is, gliding softly on the air, without effort or fatigue, but with little exertion, the longest maintained, and it can, with few exceptions, elevate itself the highest. In regard to the movements of the wings, there is a similar ratio, for while the mosquito makes over 200 wing strokes per second, the sparrow makes only 13, the buzzard 3, and so on, continually decreasing with heavier bodies. A word about bats and flying fish. Although bats present no real resemblance whatever to birds or insects, but are much more like ourselves, they must be classed among the creatures of the air, because they are constantly moving in it and governed by the same laws. Their flight, being somewhat fluttering, but otherwise powerful, true, and perfect, is undoubtedly caused, particularly in the early part of the night, when feeding, by their darting right and left after the almost invisible numerous insects which they devour at once. The wing of the bat is, like that of the bird, concavo-convex, and also more or less twisted upon itself, but it differs in so far that its arm is not covered with feathers, but a very delicate membrane which forms the parachute-like wing. Their nocturnal, and therefore disreputable habits, with our dislike for the blood-sucking propensity of a large species, the vampire, has kept our interest in these otherwise harmless and clean creatures at rather freezing point. But they can be tamed easily and are capable of giving considerable pleasure. The flight of a shoal of flying fish as they shoot forth from the dark green wave in a glittering throng, gleaming brightly in the sunshine, is a charming sight. But these fish can scarcely be classed with the creatures of the air, because true flight, that is the manipulation of the wings, is lacking. They are mentioned because they represent, like the kite, the first step toward the true flight which all other creatures in the air possess. They are capable of moving through the air from 500 to 600 feet, and as much as 20 feet above the water. The fish first acquires initial velocity by a preliminary rush through the water, when it throws itself suddenly into the air, and at the same moment spreads out kite-like at a slight inclination upwards its extraordinarily large pectoral fins. It keeps up the great speed until its momentum is exhausted, when the same performance is repeated. The fact in favor of mechanical flight is certainly incontrovertible that less surface and less power is required and flight maintained the longest in proportion to heavier bodies. It must be convincing, therefore, that it is possible for man to apply the laws of flight to industrial purposes in the same manner as he has been able, in these days, to apply all the other grand physical laws that he has taken the trouble to study and fathom. The law of surface and force reigns in the most absolute and exact manner over all flying animals. It does not stop here. Nature, whose laws are general and universal, has not created this one only for the restricted compass of the winged animate beings. The law which sustains on the water the leaf and the straw is the same for the gigantic Great Eastern. and the mechanical law of the forces which drives the wheelbarrow also conducts on its iron line the locomotive and its endless train. End of section 16. Section 17. Mechanical practicability of artificial flight. Living beings have been, in every age, compared to machines, but it is only in the present day that the bearing and justice of this comparison are fully comprehensible. Modern engineers have created machines which execute more difficult and various operations than animate beings are capable of. Yet it is always from nature first that man has to draw his inspirations. Of the different functions of animal mechanism, that of locomotion is certainly one of the most important and interesting. And as we have brought this art on land and water by successfully imitating the natural movements of walking and swimming to quite a high state of perfection, the next great problem, equally possible because flight is a natural movement, remains to be solved. Of course, as different as the wheel of the locomotive is from the limb of the quadruped, and the screw of the steamship from the fin of a fish, so will the coming flying machine differ from the construction of bird, bat, or insect. Walking, swimming, and flying are modifications of, and merging into, each other by insensible gradations, and the modifications, resulting therefrom, are necessitated by the amount of support afforded on, and in the different mediums, earth, water, air. Although flight is, indisputably, the finest of the different animal movements, yet it does not essentially differ from the other two, as the material and forces employed are literally the same as those in walking and swimming. Flight is, therefore, a purely mechanical problem, and in compliance with the law of decrease, as stated before, the surface requisite to transport bodies in the air is found to be about 1/2, proportionally, to 12 times the weight. Applying this observation to an apparatus of, say, 200 pounds, we find that the surface of a bird of 18 pounds, about 1/12 of said 200 pounds, to be 10 square feet. Multiplying this by 12, its weight, we have 120 square feet of surface, and of which 1/2, accordingly, 60 square feet, is enough for the support of 200 pounds. Such a machine, although possessing much less surface than parachutes generally do, is in the form of inclined planes of proper construction, fully sufficient for man to slide down safely through the air without exertion from an elevation at least 10 times the vertical distance, that is, from the top of the Palace Hotel to the foot of Baldwin's. As to the force required, although impossible to give datas, the law of decrease with greater weight reigns absolute here also. Man's muscular power for tolerably swift horizontal flight is far greater than necessary, and with properly constructed contrivances he will be able to travel at an incline upwards of 1 in 30, at least 20 miles an hour, by manual power alone. A carrier pigeon flies, for a short time, at the rate of 100 miles an hour, and some birds much faster. But in employing any of the many excellent motive powers at command now, and with larger machines, we will be able to surpass the swiftest birds. As for the objection that the fury of the wind will hinder artificial flight, it is refuted by observing that even a hurricane, which, traveling over 80 miles an hour, occurs but rarely, does hardly prevent the flight of fast birds, and still less would that of a compact and solid flying machine, because of its greater weight and momentum. And even if an occasional storm should be dangerous, the machine, by its greater swiftness, could be turned above, below, or sideways out of the path of destruction, or it need not travel at such rare times. Besides, the effect of the storm upon a body within its own medium is insignificant to what it is when that body offers resistance by being attached to another medium, as ships on the water, or houses and fences on land. End of section 17. Section 18 of Lecture on Artificial Flight by William G. Krueger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Barry Eads. Section 18. Flying Machines of the Present, Their Defects. When it was found that no marked improvements could be made in balloons, the more advanced thinkers, turning their attention in an opposite direction, commenced to justly regard the winged being as the true model for flying machines, and experiments are now being made in different parts of the world, of which all go to prove that flight is far more a question of mechanical adaptation, construction, and manipulation than of enormous power, which, of course, in any experiment must prove unavailable if improperly applied. Some of the motive engines lately exhibited in England produced such remarkable power as certainly no bird possesses. One of 4 horsepower weighed 40 pounds and occupied but a few cubic feet. Another of 13 pounds exerted over 1 horsepower, and at some experiments in France last year, a steam engine of 2.5 horsepower weighed 80 pounds, and being applied to a machine with 2 vertical screw propellers of 12-foot diameter each, it raised 120 pounds of the whole weight of 160 pounds. But, as far as known, these different motive powers have been employed so far only to elevate and propel machines by vertical fan-like contrivances, helicopterics, or by aeroplanes, pushed forward and upward by screw propellers, either quite as irrational as ballooning, because the rigid plane, wedged forward and upward at a given angle, in a straight line or in a circle, does not embody the principles carried out in nature. Hence, the several advocates of the aeroplane and helicopteric have met with but indifferent success. Perhaps the best representative model of a flying machine on the principles of inclined planes was that of Mr. Stringfellow, exhibited in London in 1868, and which occasionally could rise. It had 3 aeroplanes superimposed as advocated by Wyndham, the frames of which were made of light wood, with cloth drawn over it tightly like rigid kites, fixed parallel one above the other, with a tail attached to the middle one. It had a small box underneath for the motive power and a light screw propeller behind for pushing it forward. By giving the machine an upward angle, the planes strike continually upon new layers of air, and so cause a rise, like a kite pushed from behind. The whole structure had about 36 square feet of surface, and weighed, including the steam engine, which exerted nearly 1/2 horsepower, under 12 pounds. It proved conclusively that, while the inclined plane, in a practical and different form, is necessary for aerostation, the secret of solving the problem lays far more in the mechanical application of certain laws governing the art of flight than in enormous power. These kite-form machines did not succeed, in spite of their great motive power and lightness, because the supporting planes were not active and flexible, but presented passive or dead surfaces without power to accommodate themselves to altered circumstances. These planes were made to strike the air at a given angle, instead of continually changing to suit the elastic medium, and in which respect the ordinary kite is a better flying machine. If not driven with great velocity, such a machine cannot support itself in the atmosphere. Besides, on account of its great surface exposed, a strong wind can easily capsize it, while natural wings, on the contrary, present small flying surfaces, and their great speed converts the space through which they are driven into a solid basis for support. This arrangement enables wings to seize and utilize the air, and renders them superior to the adverse currents, not of their forming. In this respect, they entirely differ from balloons and all forms of fixed aeroplanes. The different small helicopteric models, relying entirely on the aid of the screw, made from time to time, were also lacking, as stated before, in some of the true principles of flight. Although some of these models could not only rise, but also carry a certain amount of freight, as was shown by the delicately constructed clockwork models of M. Nader, a prominent French scientist, and others. One remarkable model, exhibited some years ago, was that of M. Phillips. It was made entirely of metal, weighed 2 pounds, and had 4 two-bladed fans inclined to the horizon at an angle of 20 degrees, and made to revolve in opposite directions with immense energy. The motive power employed was obtained from the combustion of charcoal, nitre, and gypsum, the products of combustion mixing with water in the boiler and forming gas-charged steam, which was delivered at a high pressure from the extremities of the arms of the fans on the principle discovered by Hero of Alexandria. The production of flight by artificial wings is the most ancient method proposed, and will, undoubtedly, in a greatly modified form and in combination with other contrivances, solve the problem. But to exactly imitate natural wings would be found as impossible as the production by the other different methods proposed so far. Of the more recent attempts at the solution of the problem by means of artificial wings worked by steam power, and perhaps most determined, was that of Mr. Kaufman of Glasgow. The machine had superimposed aeroplanes, similar to those used by Stringfellow. The two wings were of great length, narrow, pointed towards the end, and were made to flap up and down somewhat like the wings of a bird. The model exhibited weighed complete 42 pounds, but the dimensions for a large machine were to be length about 30 feet, height 5 feet, width 6 feet, length of each wing 60 feet, surface of each 400 feet, total weight of machine 8,000 pounds. Nominal power 120 horses, intended speed 60 miles per hour, with water supply for 5 hours and oil as fuel for 10 hours. Besides, a pendule weighing 85 pounds and 40 feet in length was attached, which could, telescope-like, be drawn up when necessary. The model was made exactly to show the inventor's theory and to ascertain if the connection to the wings could be made strong enough to withstand the violent twisting and bending strains to which they were exposed. When steam at a pressure of over 150 pounds was turned on, the wings made a short series of furious flaps and broke. The experiment failed, because to exactly imitate the movements of the long and delicate wings of fast-flying birds on a large scale is impossible. The leverage to flap up and down 60-foot-long wings being simply enormous beyond computation, and no material can be found strong enough to withstand it. Another machine, the propulsion of which was also to be effected by means of artificial wings, was exhibited some years ago in England. It differed entirely from the other in this respect, that it was very light, weighing scarcely 30 pounds, and was intended for a man to fly by his own muscular power. It had about 70 square feet of surface, 2 short wings, and the ribs were made of paragon wire, such as is used in umbrellas, and covered with silk. By a preliminary quick run, the inventor could take short, jump-like flights of more than 100 feet. But this machine was also in a very crude state of perfection. These different practical experiments, although more or less unsuccessful, and others similar, but of which many models were far more ingenious than practical, have at least established the certain prospect and certainty of an early solution of the problem. And were it not that but very few, comparatively, of the great number of theories which have been proposed from time to time for the accomplishment of this great object have been submitted to anything resembling even the remotest approach to practical tests, and that the lack of means is generally the insurmountable barrier in experimenting, aerial navigation would today be an established fact. End of section 18. Section 19 of Lecture on Artificial Flight by William G. Krueger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Barry Eads. Section 19. The Practical Flying Ship of the Near Future. Possessing then all the data possible on the subject, it is perhaps not so very difficult as is generally supposed to arrive at a satisfactory result, and, like other great inventions before, the coming airship will also be a rather simple affair. While it will not likely possess such prodigious weight as 8,000 to 10,000 pounds, with a 120 horsepower steam engine, sufficient almost for a man of war, it will neither be as light as a feather, comparatively, but hold the golden middle. The inclined planes, in a greatly modified form, will by no means be discarded, as in fact no flying machine could be built otherwise. But, as stated before, this is only one principle long recognized, the ABC, so to speak, towards the solution of the problem. These planes, in wedging forward for certain reasons, should be elastic in some manner, and which has not been attempted by any inventor yet. The frames and covering of all models built so far have been rigid and immovable, and yet, even with these great defects, partial success has been obtained already. The fan or screw never will be used as the only means in propelling, but will be very effective in doing service as a part of the whole, with other contrivances in driving and guiding. But their form and style must be considerably different from anything known at present. A modified and peculiar form and style of wings, as mentioned here before, must also be employed in combination with the planes and fans to serve the double purpose of driving and lifting. By the manipulation of these wings, the accumulating and compressed air is thrown underneath the machine, thereby urging the same in a forward and upward direction, and by which the planes in front are made to continually rise upon new layers of the elastic medium, like a kite when a boy runs forward. The planes must be fixed in such a manner that they can be set at different angles with the horizon, in order that the machine may rise sooner when the angle is greatest because of the greater resistance of the air against a larger surface exposed, and to guide through the atmosphere swifter after elevation has been attained when the angle of the planes is most acute, thereby offering the least amount of surface to the horizontally opposing air. No flying creature rises in the air vertically, but ascends at an incline. A swallow, one of the very best flyers, lifts itself with difficulty from the ground. An eagle, particularly after eating, has to run some distance, flapping its wings vigorously before it can rise. An insect, possessing considerable spring power in its limbs, always takes a good jump at the moment its wings are spread out for elevation, at an upward angle forward. With similar contrivances for the purpose, must a practical flying machine be provided. It should, in combination with a certain amount of spring power to enable it to rise with greater ease at the final moment, and also to reduce the shock in alighting to a minimum, have wheels to run over the ground, until sufficient force and momentum has been attained to launch it into the boundless realms of space. To be thoroughly practical, the machine must be under perfect control, and be made to descend upon any spot desired with absolute safety and ease. This can be accomplished by the combined effort of the propellers and wings. By exerting the power of these contrivances in opposite directions, the disturbed atmosphere is thrown in volumes underneath the machine, which, on account of its similarity to a parachute, although of a greatly different form, can be made to descend vertically and very slow. The doubt expressed by many that the guidance of an airship is possible is easily refuted. All bodies possessing the propelling force within them can guide themselves in an elastic medium. Of this we have millions of examples before us in all flying creatures. Finally, a practical shape and proper size and weight will form one of the most essential elements in a successful flying machine, which has been disregarded more or less so far. Of course, it is impossible to calculate already, before an actual machine has been built and datas can be fixed, the limits of these factors in the average aerial structure. My impressions are that the weight of a single carriage will be from 400 to 500 pounds, inclusive. A motive force of 3 to 5 horsepower, it will have a total length of from 40 to 50 feet, by about the same in width from tip to tip, and a surface of from 500 to 600 square feet will be more than sufficient to sustain a total weight of 1,000 pounds. For such a machine will be capable to carry from 3 to 4 persons, or its equivalent weight of express matter, letters, newspapers, and other light freight. Of course, free mail facilities for our wise Solons will, perhaps, unfortunately have to be barred out. When the novelty and excitement of this style of travel will have subsided, we may take the next step in aerostation by carrying a much greater number of passengers and heavier freight, not in a single machine, but by making 2 or more to support inclined planes of certain construction between them. These planes, in swift horizontal flight, could be made to carry, in suitable cars underneath much more than their own weight, because the power of support which the air affords to inclined planes at a great speed is simply enormous, amounting to 50 pounds per square foot in a pressure of 100 miles per hour. For this purpose, the manner of placing these aeroplanes one above the other, as proposed by Mr. Wenham many years ago, would be practical to some extent. The great swiftness with which these machines are expected to travel seems at first to rouse fear in us to trust our more or less valuable lives into such a wonderful structure, and it possibly staggers our belief that such great speed can be performed with any degree of safety to brittle bone and breathing valve. But all these objections are easily refuted. The aerial traveler sits securely inside the strong machine, in no danger of catching a cold from the strong air current rushing by, very much like the passenger in a railroad car. And if of an inquisitive turn of mind for the beauty of the surrounding panorama, he has suitable windows for observation. If the air passenger suffers from gout, rheumatism, or is susceptible to seasickness, he will experience no inconvenience, because there is no jogging, no rumbling over cobblestones or broken rails, or riding on a heavy sea. He will feel no motion at whatever height he may be, but will glide voluptuously, without perception almost, like a summer cloud through the vast ocean of the aerial fluid. The machine being under perfect control can be made to travel very slow when towards the point of destination, and may be stopped at any height to remain stationary or leisurely descend. And lastly, speed appears greatly diminished when the object is viewed from a distance, as we can observe on a railroad train. A telegraph pole standing near the track will flit by like a flash of lightning, so to speak. But if any considerable distance off, it disappears very slow. But when an object is followed by the eye from a considerable elevation, this fact is still more striking. The eye can command at a glance almost hundreds of miles of country, and a city can be seen at a distance of at least 50 miles in advance, giving the aeronaut ample time for preparing a descent, if so desired. Of course, he must be well acquainted with landmarks to know what part of the country he is in, but this knowledge will be acquired much easier than water navigation. Such a boat will be the coming flying machine of the near future. The natural elements, so far from presenting barriers and obstacles as they do to a great extent on land and ocean navigation, seem to be particularly inviting to aerostation. Previous to nearly every great discovery, difficulties have been thought to exist which its completion dissolved. In the days of stage coaching, the expectations held up by those interested in steam transport were considered, even by the most competent and intelligent men, as wholly chimerical. Yet the locomotive far surpasses the racehorse in speed and endurance. When practice proved and datas could be fixed that smooth tires met all the requirements on railroads, in place of cogwheels to gear into racks, how easy all calculations on adhesive force and friction then became. So with flight. End of section 19. Sections 20 and 21 of Lecture on Artificial Flight by William G. Krueger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Barry Eads. Section 20. What changes for the better will be. It is impossible to overestimate the benefits which will accrue to mankind from such a creation. Flying will become a studied art, an amusement, an accomplishment, and inconvenience from sultry heat, or freezing cold, or deadly epidemics will no longer be suffered. Flying will become a business, a trade, and the advantages derived from it for industrial purposes will be wonderfully great. New channels of employment will be opened to thousands, yes, millions of starving fellow beings. A new era will be inaugurated in history, and as great as has been the destiny of our race, it will be quite outlustered by the grandeur and magnitude of coming events. Traveling at a speed of over 100 miles an hour, distance will become comparatively annihilated. Cutting through the air from San Francisco to New York, for instance, in 24 hours at 1/6 in cost and time. Far safer because of no irregulations nor obstructions of road, no snow blockades or unnecessary delays. Far cheaper because of no great expense for outfit or maintenance. The aerial carriage will soon become the great means of travel throughout the world. The vast uninhabited but productive regions of this globe will be populated from overcrowded and impoverished communities because of the extraordinary cheap, safe, and rapid travel by flying machines. New life will again be imparted to enterprise, speculation, and labor, and lands will be cultivated and great cities be built in regions where the foot of human being has not trod for ages. The Andes and Rocky Mountains will become as familiar to us as the hills of our own city, and mining and other discoveries will follow each other with wonderful rapidity. The vexing and expensive explorations in the interiors of Africa and Australia and towards the North Pole will soon be brought to a speedy and satisfactory conclusion, and some of the wildest dreams of men be realized. End of section 20. Section 21. Concluding remarks. The accomplishment of aerial navigation, then, is within reach. Its practicability can no longer be denied. It will be one of the most glorious and fruitful conquests, and of the highest value and importance to civilized nations. But all inventions, and particularly an undertaking of such gigantic nature, requires pecuniary assistance. This should not, in our age of progress, be lacking for a single moment, because, if for no other reason, the first promoters of it will reap such great financial benefits therefrom as must be beyond their calculation. Singer, Howe, Colt, McCormick, and hundreds of others, all, with thousands of friends so immensely wealthy, bear out this assertion. Let not this enlightened age look upon a great invention as was done in Robert Fulton's time when he proposed the steamship to Napoleon in 1801. The plan was laid before a scientific commission, and these learned men reported it as visionary and impracticable. Such was the reception which steam navigation, that has achieved such immense results, first received at the hands of philosophy and capital. But France lost thereby, indirectly, the control of Europe and Napoleon his crown, while another nation, America, more wise, 10 years later commenced to reap the benefits emanating from Fulton's genius. Means, then, being necessary for the accomplishment of this great object, let them be forthcoming at once, that California may enjoy the honor and the first fruits of this great invention. In conclusion, let me thank you for the kind attention you have bestowed upon a weak exponent of a great subject. End of section 21. End of Lecture on Artificial Flight by William G. Krueger.